Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And we've got something special to talk about today. We're going to be talking about the collaboration album between Talib Kweli and Styles P, called The Seven. But here's the thing. When it comes to this sort of hip-hop project, I don't want to be talking about this alone, especially when you have two rappers with such a storied history in the industry. And therefore, to handle some of this, I'm calling on somebody who I really should have collaborated with a long time before now. Say hello to Mr. Luke James. How you doing, Luke?
Good, man. Thanks for having me on.
Well, I'm really happy that we finally got to do this. We were talking about collaborating back when we were thinking about, it was like Ghostface Killah and MF Doom were talking about doing something together. But
never happened.
It seems like that sort of thing happens with MF Doom, but You know what? I'm happy we could manage to find something to do here. So,
me too, man.
So, quick question for you: when you were going into this project, when you heard about it, did you have any expectations going in, like from what you knew about these artists?
Well, I did expect, obviously, some nice bars, especially from Talib Kweli. I mean, both of these guys have been in the game 20 plus years. You got Talib Kweli, who's more known for his socially aware content. You got Styles P, who comes with that gangsta shit because he's down with the Louch. So I was really curious to see what it would sound like when these two came together. You know, they have two very different styles, and you know, they really set it off nicely, I think, with that track Poets and Gangstas, where we get this jazzy beat, you know, has some nice bubbly bass lines happening on it there. And, you know, the Poets and Gangstas thing works perfectly because Talib Kweli is more poetical. Then you got Styles P, who's more of a gangsta, like I said. And I thought it was really interesting how these two MCs who have been at it for so long were able to come together and make a project where they had a little bit of gangsta shit on there, but of course they were also bringing that socially aware content, which is something a lot of rappers are doing these days. And I mean, where these guys have been around for so long, I knew they had a lot to say, so I was excited to hear it.
And I was coming from a similar point of view. Like, these two guys were, if you go back to the 90s, when a lot of these guys were first starting off, when you had Talib Kweli doing stuff with Mos Def and Black Star, and you had Styles P doing stuff with the Lox, like, these guys were in very different lanes, like, even 10 years ago. And one thing that I liked a lot with this project, and one thing that actually kind of caught me a little by surprise, was how much they kind of met in the middle and managed to find some of that again. Because Styles P, he's been bringing out some of the more socially aware stuff with his verse on Joey Badass with the Super Predator, a song I really liked off that last project. But what surprised me is that Talib Kweli, he got a little bit more vicious here, and I don't think I've heard as much of this side from him before, but I gotta say I like it.
I think Talib sounded really fed up on this project, to be honest with you. And anyone who follows him on Twitter or has seen him on Twitter knows that he's not afraid to say what he thinks. So I'm really glad that he actually put that into this project. And there are a lot of great lines, a lot of really great content on here. I especially like where on one song, you got to excuse my notes, they're over here, I'm recording over here. But on Brown Guys, man, where he was rapping about what it was like to be a brown guy with an Islamic name and just how you get treated so differently, especially, you know, whether you're checking in at an airport or whatever the case may be. And he had this line that stuck out to me where he says, it has its ups and downs, but the downs are that your spinal cord could be snapped in the back of a van, which is a throwback, obviously, to what happened to Freddie Gray. And I just thought that was an interesting line of saying everybody has their ups and downs, but for some people, the downs are just way, way, way down there, man. Like some crazy shit could happen to you. And, you know, they really were speaking a lot on some of the things that we're seeing happen in America with police brutality. Lots of other things are touched on this project. I mean, they even at one point mention how there is black on black crime or black on black violence, but you don't hear people talk about the white on white violence or, you know, white crime with some of these bankers and all that crazy shit that's going on. So I think they had a very well-rounded approach on here where they not only addressed some of the problems within the black community and maybe within black people where we can look at ourselves, but also, you know, they're looking at what is going on with everybody else as well. And, you know, it didn't come across as waving their finger or anything like that. They're just veterans who have a lot to say, and I think they did a really good job of covering that content.
And I would agree with you there. Like, the one, going back to Brown Guys, like, the one thing that really struck out at me came from Styles P, who sort of modulated his situation, like, you know what, I'm not trying to preach, but I have kids who are in this sort of situation. And he makes comments how a lot of the comparisons when it draws towards white people who are arrested for drug crimes versus black people who are arrested for drug crimes and what comes out of it. And his ultimate thing is like, I just wish, like, in the whole situation, if you believe this sort of crap, I wish you were blind so you wouldn't see what your kids get up to.
Yeah.
That was just like one of those smart little bars that I really love that he threw in. And then let's circle back to In the Fields. Start off like it was bookended from quotes from Malcolm X that I thought had some real poignancy to it. That was one of those other tracks that got pretty vicious and pretty pointed and direct with some of its content.
Yeah, you also had some really grimy production on there. I like that eerie piano and just the whole idea of the field nigga and the house nigga and how you have some people who really are, they just want massa to be okay. Those Malcolm X quotes, like you said, they really tied this together, What was it when he said, when massa's sick, we's sick? Like, it was kind of funny, but at the same time, it's showing you the stark reality of what's going on with the way that some people think. And not to move too far away from that track, but just coming back to Brown Guys for a second, another couple of bars that stuck out to me is when Talib Kweli was talking about these hip-hop fans who say they're colorblind, they love hip-hop, but they still hold these views that are kind of a little bit maybe conservative, a little bit racist. I just thought it was kind of interesting how he called these people out, because I don't know what your comment section gets like. I'm sure you've had some pretty crazy shit happening in there, like I have. But I find anytime you talk about these political type of projects, you have hip-hop fans who come on and they're just like, oh, well, they're very dismissive, some of these hip-hop fans. I just find it interesting how you can be so into hip-hop culture, love the music, and, hip-hop is just dominated specifically by African Americans, and yet you can be so dismissive to some of the issues and ideas that they talk about. People will say that they're just being victims, or, they're being too far left, or whatever the case may be, but really these are people who are speaking on some real issues that you can see going on. And that doesn't mean that they're ignoring other issues. As I said, they are addressing violence in the streets and some of the other things on this project, which, is good. It's sort of a counterattack to these people who are going to complain. But that was something that really stuck out to me, just the people who want to be part of hip-hop culture. They love it, they want to talk about it, but they want to ignore all the real shit that is discussed sometimes.
Absolutely. And I think that also calls back that people, they like to enjoy the music until it asks something out of them for them to engage with something that's real. And the thing that I actually really found pretty impressive about some of that is that not only did they balance a lot of the political and social commentary, but by the time you go into a little bit more in the second half of the album, like, you still get consistently strong bars across the board. And I don't know about you, my favorite track easily on this project, 9.5 with Sheek, Louch, and Jadakiss.
Oh, that was a banger, man. That was a banger.
That was so much fun. I loved the production there. It just had this muted backing tones to the scratching. It had these orchestral swells coming up. It felt very much of that mid to late 90s, not late 90s, mid 90s gangsta era. It had a lot of old school flavor to it. And you know what? I have to say this is making me remind me of how much wasted potential happened with the Locks that we didn't get more out of it, because they flow off each other so well, and there's so much chemistry there.
Absolutely, and I don't know if you checked their last album that they just put out. I think it was maybe last year. I actually reviewed it, and I was kind of disappointed. You could tell that they were kind of aiming towards the younger audience. They had a track with Fetty Wap, some more trappish elements, and I'm not going to hate on any MC for sort of trying to grow and do something different and reach that other audience, but it didn't really stick with me that well. But as you said, on this track, man, I love that Marco Polo production. He's been a staple in hip-hop for such a long time. He's made a lot of great beats for a lot of great MCs, so it was good to hear from him. And Sheek Louch is just, I've always thought he was kind of underrated. He doesn't get as much attention as Styles P and Jadakiss. Not to say he's better, I just feel like he's had some pretty solid solo projects as well. He has a pretty good verse on this track, and I thought Jada floated on that beat. He had a nice line as well about the protests and how it doesn't really seem like things change, but you still got to do it. So even from the guest features, you're getting some good content on here. So that was important as well, that everyone who was featured on here really lended their voice to the overall sound and just cohesiveness of the project.
I would completely agree with you. It ties back to the guest features who are actually engaged with the material. I really appreciate that. Skip a little bit further, and you had Rhapsody's verse. And she makes reference to the Dakota Access Pipeline, how they protested, they fought for it, but ultimately it's still ending up getting built, and they just have to keep on trudging through it. It's the sense that comes with a lot of the political themes of this album, is that things, they aren't getting better. Like, it is that continuous trudge that's uphill, but it's the continuous striving to do that, and ultimately it can be enough to keep on going, and that it is that constant struggle. It makes sense why Talib Kweli gets as vicious as he does in 9.5 when he actually opens up about talking about the environment. I don't think I can quote a rapper off the top of my head who has actually talked about it in that sort of framework.
Oh, they definitely got to be out there. I mean, I'd have to go and look through some of the projects I review, but I mean, Talib, what is the other line he says on there about how the fast food industry is feeding us horse meat?
Yep.
Did you catch that?
I did.
That one, I don't know if I missed a story there or if that's some conspiracy shit or what it is, but I don't know. If they're feeding us horse meat, I'm probably still going to eat it anyway, man. I had some McDonald's the other day. The shit was all right. But, you know, I thought it was kind of funny how he just threw that out there. He has all these little jabs where he is sort of speaking on just a multitude of issues. He's really making sure that he's covering his bases on that project. I also like that track, Last Ones, although, you know, it did have a bit more of a Trappist style production to it. Wasn't quite as old school as some of these other beats. But the chorus on there really stuck out to me because they're both saying how they're sort of still here while their friends have left. But Styles is referring to, you know, the gangstas and the people in the streets. And again, Talib is talking about the poets and just the rapper friends that he has. So I thought it was really interesting just how they started with that same way with poets and gangsters, and they sort of closed it on that same way to say, you know what, after over 20 years, they're both still here, still doing their thing. But throughout it, they've seen a lot of their friends either fall victim to the streets or just go crazy for whatever reason. So I thought that was a really interesting way to sort of wrap things up and finish strong, just like the project started strong.
Again, agree with you there. And one thing that I liked about that song is that it actually managed to loop things all back together. It also implies that they're also kind of got both left behind by their own scenes, which have gone in very different directions. And now they're finding that middle ground, which wouldn't have otherwise existed, or maybe it kind of did exist in its own twisted way, but back in the 90s, people weren't looking for it. Now, but circling back to conspiracies, and this is the one thing that bothers me with some of the political content on this album. And I think Styles P and the sad thing, I think Talib Kweli, he dips his toes into it too. And one of the hooks on, I forget, it's the song with Rhapsody on it. And this is the thing that bugs me when you put conspiracy stuff next to a lot of the political stuff that actually has been proven. I really didn't like when you start referencing chemtrails.
Yes. Yeah, that was actually Chris Rivers on the hook. And I was disappointed to see him featured just because I wanted a verse from him, man. That's Big Pun's son, for people who don't know. Yep. And he's a really talented rapper, man. He's really dope. I was a bit disappointed to see that he was just relegated to hook duty, but I guess it is what it is, and you carry on. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, not a problem. Thank you. But then you also have the case where Styles P on In the Fields, he references the reptilians building the pyramids.
Yeah. The reptile overlords, man.
Yeah, and
bow down.
You know what? I get that there is some common ground and crossover, especially when you can't trust the mainstream media in the same way that came up on Teleprompters. But at the same time, I'd also say Teleprompters is the weakest song here, because I heard Common's verse, and what's happening with Common, man? Like, this is disappointing. Like, consistently.
It's so funny that you say that, because as I was preparing for this review, I was reading through and I was like, you know what? His verse doesn't sound bad. Like, he has a nice flow. I mean, it's still Common. But then when I was reading through the lyrics and following along, I was like, this isn't really hitting me as hard as, you know, what a lot of the other rappers have brought on here. It wasn't really that strong of a verse. Like, it sounded all right, but it wasn't, you know, it wasn't full of a lot of great content. And that was actually one of my least favorite tracks as well. I didn't like the production on it too much. I thought, you know, they were doing something a little bit different. And it actually reminded me of like a Gorillaz song. Not to say that I don't like the Gorillaz. I love the Gorillaz, but you know what I mean? Just the way that production is, it just, I don't know how else to describe it, but it was just very different.
The deeper bass, that sharper drum line, and it tried to blend in some liquid notes of the melody, but it was trying to go for a spacier, almost more futuristic stuff. It kind of reminded me a little bit of what was on that Pharoah Monch album, War, a little bit, and some of their weirder stuff. I don't think I didn't think it came together quite as well as it could have. I think some of the content felt a little bit mismatched, like in terms of all three verses. And again, like, I don't know what's happening with Common. I think Black America, again, had promise. It kind of got screwed by the election and bad timing there. But at the same time, it wasn't like, it's not like Water for Chocolate Common or Be Common, and that bugs me.
No.
And you think
too much filler on that album, in my opinion, because I reviewed it too, and he had a lot of very strong content.
Yeah.
But then there was just this string of like lovey-dovey songs, which isn't something that's new to Common. It's not new to hip hop. I mean, everyone always does some lovey-dovey tracks, but it sort of took away from the punch the album had, because those songs where he was getting political and bringing great content, they really stuck out. And then you have these songs on there, and you're just sort of like skipping past them. Like, what is this shit, man? Get me to the goods.
I completely agree. So overall, tying this all together, I think this was a good project. I'm not really wowed by it in the same way. I think it starts really strong. Poets and Gangstas, Brown Guys, 9.5, 3 songs right out of the gate I think are really potent. And then it kind of slides off a little bit from there. Like I love Ono's production on In the Fields and Brown Guys. I think it's just, I love that sax that comes in on Brown Guys. It's just a great addition. It almost had a bit of it felt a little bit cleaner than what Static Selecta typically does, but it had some of that feel to it, and I appreciated that.
Yeah, very jazzy.
Yeah. But overall, you give scores out of 5, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so if I was given a score out of 5, I'd probably say a 3.5 out of 5.
Yeah, that's actually what my rating was for this, because for me a 3.5 is a project that I really enjoy, but I probably won't consider it to make my top 20 at the end of the year. It'll certainly be an honorable mention, a project that I think is worth checking out, but not quite, like my 4s and above are for the projects that I really love. And this one I wasn't all the way in love with, but I really hope people give it a chance, because it kind of got lost in the shuffle since it dropped when we got Joey Badass's album just before it, and then Kendrick dropped. And I don't think a lot of people are really checking for these two these days. I mean, I don't really want to say that, but I think you know what I mean. They're not really at the forefront of the game right now. Like, people aren't waiting really hard for them to drop a solo record, So I think this one sort of went a little under the radar, but hopefully people will check it out. I'm sure the hip-hop purists and the elitists maybe were waiting for this, but I think it got lost in the shuffle with some of these more mainstream releases that artists have dropped.
Totally agree. I think when you have situations like you have the Joey Badass album, which I think is a little stronger. I think Kendrick's, again, a little bit stronger. I think this is going to get lost in the shuffle, and I think there's already been articles written about how this record has gotten lost in the shuffle. I think there was one I saw on either Noisy or Vice. But the funny thing is that this is still quality here. Like, there's good guest verses. I think I really would like to hear more from Talib Kweli and Styles P, because they have good chemistry with each other. I'd like to see them trade off bars a little bit more, and I really wish Talib Kweli, this is the one thing that does kind of irk me when it comes to some of the his flows are good, but I wish he connected some of his rhymes a little better, because there are some forced rhymes on this shit.
Oh, there was one hook. What was it? We ain't playing games. This ain't no Atari. I think that was on Poets and Gangstas.
Yeah.
I mean, it didn't ruin the song, but it's just sometimes you hear lines like that you've heard a million times. It just, So I do kind of get what you're saying to a certain point with some of those bars.
Yeah, but at the same time, I think this is quality. I think I'd like to see them do more together. I'd like to see them do more than an EP.
I think if they had expanded on this, it could have been better. Maybe it would have had more of an impact if they, but they would have to keep the consistency a bit tighter, because, as you said, I felt much the same way, that it sort of tapered off on the last tracks, but it really started strong, because as I was working on this review and taking my notes, those last couple of tracks I really didn't have too much to say about compared to, the first 3 or 4 where I was like, oh shit, especially Brown Guys. That would have to be my favorite track on here. Just all the lines on that. They really didn't waste a bar hardly on that thing, so that would probably be my favorite, but, 3.5 feels fair to me.
So overall, where could they find you if you want to actually check out more of your content? Because you put out a lot of great quality hip-hop reviews, both mainstream and underground. I've been watching you probably since 2015. You started putting out a lot of your stuff?
I took a year off, but I've been at it altogether. It would be probably about 3 years worth of work, something around that. So yeah, I mean, we've both been at it for quite a while. I'm glad we were finally able to do this.
Absolutely.
So thank you for, finally making this happen. But you can just look me up on YouTube, Luke James BGN. That's also my Instagram, my Twitter, same thing on Facebook. So Luke James BGN for pretty much everything.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot for coming on board, man. And if you guys would like to see more of his content, be sure to check him out. He puts out a lot of hip-hop reviews that I respect a great deal. Covers a lot of stuff that goes a lot deeper in depth than a lot of stuff I hear. And hey, when are you going to find 2 Canadian guys who are going to talk about hip-hop in this bowl?
That's right, man. Canadian connection, baby.
Yeah. All right, so until next time, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time. Fuck the KKK, respect the family, me and you gotta play.